Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. I'm coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina. I greet you, my Muslim brothers and sisters, in our traditional greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. And peace be unto all of our non-Muslim friends who will be joining us for this Facebook Live presentation. I wanted to, before checking out of this hotel that I'm in Raleigh, share some information from a newspaper down in the lobby that grabbed my attention. And it served as a reminder to me, and it should serve as a reminder to you of how careful we must be about malicious propaganda. This is the weekend edition of the USA Today newspaper, and one of the leading captions on the front page, in fact, it is the most bold caption on the front page of all the articles on the front page. ISIS in our backyard. Their faces are many. And this is, in fact, they're billing this as USA Today's special report. The subcaption reads, "Men, women, young, old, and most born in the USA." I'm going to share with you what this article is saying. A teen playing basketball after school, an FBI agent, a couple on their honeymoon, a young mother raising her 7-year-old son, all American, women, men, Muslim, non-Muslim, African American, white, all arrested on charges of helping the Islamic State, also known as ISIS. ISIS and supporters of the terrorist group have seemingly ingrained themselves in America. New York City recently saw 2 terror attacks in less than 6 weeks. But even in less high-profile places, the group's followers are pressing forward. USA Today reviewed 152 federal cases across the U.S. involving ISIS from 2014 to 2017. 152 federal cases over a 3-year period. It continues, and found that its followers are just as diverse as the states where they have been caught. Data compiled by USA Today using federal court documents along with 2 studies on terrorism by New America, a nonprofit think tank, and Charles Kurtzman, a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, show these ISIS-inspired attacks and the numbers of arrests have decreased sharply since the group's rise to prominence in late 2014 and early 2015. In fact, USA Today's analysis shows there were double the number of cases in 2015 when compared with 2017. The data reflect only a sample of 152 cases and do not represent all terrorism cases. ISIS's quick rise to power and conquest of territory in Iraq and Syria, where it created a caliphate, or an Islamic State centered on a Muslim revival, left many surprised but ISIS failed in its ultimate goal of a global caliphate and the defeat of non-believers and suffered significant losses in territory and members in 2017. Still, the FBI and experts say the group is far from gone. The good news is the caliphate is crumbling, and that's positive for all of us. FBI Director Christopher Wray told the House Judiciary Committee last month, quote, "The bad news is ISIS is encouraging some of its recruits and potential recruits to stay where they are and commit attacks right in the homeland," end quote. The FBI says it is investigating about 1,000 ISIS-related threats across the nation right now. In addition to those cases, agents are investigating a larger number of lone wolf types who are motivated and inspired by ISIS to commit attacks, Wray said. Though many point fingers at foreign nations for cultivating terrorists, suspects in attacks USA Today examined were all in the U.S. legally. Most of the suspects were born and raised in America. Of the 152 cases reviewed by USA Today, 55 involved a suspected plot on U.S. soil, 40 of which were prevented. 60% of the suspects were characterized as lone wolves. Those people arrested in ISIS-inspired plots didn't share an overarching commonality. They were young and old, married and single, religious and secular. Some suspects blamed mental illness or depression. Others were lured by the group's false promise of protection and power for Muslims and peace in the Middle East. Let me just say here parenthetically that nowhere in this article does it mention how many were lured by government-paid agents to manufacture a case against someone who was mentally and or emotionally unbalanced. I continue with the article. Ron Hosko, a former assistant FBI director, said there are a few things that seem more prevalent in these people. Quote, "They seem to be people who don't have a strong connection or an anchor of some kind to their lives." Now, this is a very important point. This is probably the most valuable statement in the article, in my humble opinion, because this is true. This is right on point. Many of the individuals that fall into these plots, most importantly, we'll put the mental health cases aside, and there are serious mental health related issues to these types of attempted conspiracies. There are. And significantly among those cases that are manufactured by FBI quote-unquote informants or provocateurs. But the most common thread in the vast majority of these cases, of these manufactured cases, the vast majority of them are manufactured. And the most common thread, in fact, let me say the most common thread among the cases that are not externally manufactured cases by law enforcement puppets. In those cases, when you examine the profile, which is what I do, very carefully, you find individuals, and time after time after time, most often young men, sometimes older men, on occasion young women, who don't have an anchor within their Islam, within their deen, many of them don't really understand their deen, their Islam well. And this is what helps to make them very susceptible to these types of manipulations. Whether the manipulations are taking place through their indiscriminate exposure to internet garbage in the form of jihadi videos, or whether it's through the exposure of someone who is manipulating them right here on the ground in the United States. Let me continue. Again, they seem to be people who don't have a strong connection or an anchor of some kind to their lives. It's like they're looking to connect to something or with something bigger to give them a greater purpose. That's a very, very important consideration. And then another factor in the matter too is the legitimate anger, the legitimate grievance that many of these, especially young Muslims, feel to what they see taking place in predominantly Muslim lands, the destruction they see taking place more often than not at the hands of militaries connected to their own governments and other Western governments. That's part of it as well. In 2015, getting back to the article, Heather Kaufman, a 29-year-old white mother raising her 7-year-old son in the suburbs of Glen Allen, Virginia, became entranced with the group and started dating an Islamic State member who was fighting overseas. Now, how was she dating him? Online? They developed an online relationship. SubhanAllah. It doesn't get into it, but anyway, this is clearly an example of someone who was emotionally unbalanced. If what is being said right here is true. Friends say the giving, devoted mother who used to take her son to school every day and spend days off from work with her close-knit family instead turned to social media and filled her news feed with support for the militant group. She even tried to plan a move overseas to help the group before her arrest and conviction. And no doubt this is what she ended up being arrested and convicted for, trying to get overseas to this quote-unquote boyfriend, this relationship that she had established online. If in fact this is true, that's why she ended up being arrested. And it would be interesting to know how that case ended. In fact, I'm going to do a little background check to see. I wouldn't be surprised if she had the heavy hand of the law applied to her as not only a deterrent for others, but as a very mean-spirited way of punishing her for even thinking about doing what she was thinking about doing, and then probably magnifying her attempt to go overseas, perhaps even into something else that was not a part of her plan. Allah knows best. Getting back to the article, in the 152 cases USA Today reviewed, suspects were arrested, indicted, or died in an attack in 29 states, plus Washington, D.C. Most cases, 29, were in New York. Most cases, 29, were in New York, followed by 18 in Virginia. And I'm sure they're referring primarily to Northern Virginia, part of metropolitan Washington, D.C. Other plots happened in places that didn't make national headlines. A Wisconsin man trying to travel to Syria to fight for the group. An Indiana teen who worked with ISIS members to plot an attack. A Colorado woman who tried to join the militant group and marry a fighter overseas. From 2014 to 2017, 17 people attacked targets in the U.S. on behalf of ISIS, with varying degrees of success. Some of the attacks left dozens of people hurt or dead, 2 injured, just 1 person. The people behind the attacks were all legally in the USA. 10 of the 17 suspects USA Today reviewed were born and reared in America. The 7 other suspects were not U.S. citizens but entered the country legally. 2 held green cards, 3 had been naturalized, and 2 had a visa. Many of the other suspects were arrested for traveling overseas to help the group. Others were arrested on suspicion of sending money to help finance the organization or recruit on its behalf. Abdullahi Yusuf seemed like the average Minnesota teenager. He had a loving family, played football at his high school, and got good grades. But the refugee and Somali descendant didn't feel like he fit in. That all changed with a school assignment centering on Syria. He researched the country and was outraged to learn of human rights violations, including the use of sarin gas on children. Soon he found others who were equally outraged and was welcomed into a group of young Somalians in the Burnsville area. The teens watched videos about Syria after playing basketball. The videos quickly led the teens to ISIS. They decided that instead of watching atrocities continue, they would help make them stop. Now, this is another very, very important part. Very important point. Grievance, legitimate grievance. And one of the reasons why the Aafia Foundation wants to establish a well-resourced human rights education hub, a training program, is so that we can catch individuals like this and teach them through an Islamic paradigm, through the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah and the Sirah. Teach them how they can respond to what legitimately hurts their heart in a way that would not put them, their families, and their community at risk. This is what we have to do. Instead of allowing time after time after time, government agencies, a certain government agency in particular, to identify individuals or groupings like this and decide, instead of taking measures through a center, through a masjid or center that this government agency is supposed to have a good relationship with, taking measures to prevent this from going any further, to enable these young men to get counseling and to get guidance on how to deal with what they're feeling, instead sending in a provocateur to manipulate them, to definitely make a case that we can then come around the corner after we set the fire like an arsonist, or fan the flames of a fire that couldn't have gotten very far in and of itself. Just, send in our provocateur to get the flames really going, and then come around the corner like the savior to put the fire out, with not just an investigation that reportedly took place, more of a manipulation, but then indictment that grabs the headlines, the local and sometimes the national headlines, about a new case of wannabe terrorists, aspiring jihadis that we caught in the nick of time before they could do X, Y, and Z. SubhanAllah, this happens so often. Yusuf, getting back to the article, had just turned 18 when two FBI agents stopped him from boarding a Turkey-bound flight. He had planned to join the group. Yusuf, like others, had a few reasons for wanting to join. Quote, this is a very individual and context-bound process, but I would say the individual radicalization recipe consists of two groups of factors, positive and negative, said Daniel Kohler, director of the German Institute on Radicalization and De-Radicalization Studies. The negative influences include bullying, racism, violence, and lack of perspective. When meshed with positive factors, including a quest for justice, honor, or freedom, it creates a recipe for extremism, Kohler said. And I can't disagree with that observation. It's pretty much on point. The only thing left out of the equation is the FBI's informant/provocateurs in many of these cases. Continuing with the final part of the article, in 2017, ISIS lost nearly all of its territory and militants. About 3,000 fighters were left in Iraq and Syria in December, down from a peak of 25,000 in 2014 and 2015. Iraq declared the war against ISIS over and said the country had been liberated from extremists. Let me also say here, parenthetically, that there is no mention in the article of how ISIS, the growth of ISIS over that period, was facilitated by certain Western government agencies. And Israel, how it was facilitated. How many of the armaments that they got their hands on, they acquired courtesy of the United States of America. Many of the armaments and the jeeps and the other special vehicles that they used were part of our military arsenal. They don't go into that. Despite the recent back-to-back cases in New York, the threat at home remains small and the number of attacks remains low, Kurtzman said. The intelligence community has an arrest every month or so, he said. But the major threat of the U.S. that the U.S. was worried about hasn't materialized. Quote, we were worried about bombs and missiles and thousands of people dying in attacks, but now it's a guy driving onto a sidewalk or bike path or someone with a very primitive explosion, Kurtzman said. Still, he urges caution. ISIS might have lost territory, but it isn't gone. While stopping terrorism will always be a priority for the FBI, Hosko said, religious leaders, citizens, and family members also play a part in preventing the spread of radical ideology. Quote, these ideals are never going away, he said. We as citizens cannot sit back and think law enforcement will figure it out and fix it. This affects us all. And on that note, that very important note, how this affects us all and how, yes, government will not be able to fix things. It will not. Especially when government's hands are dirty. Sees this process as being something that we should manipulate. When I say we, our country, our government, and those who blindly support it should manipulate in our interests. It's never going to change. We the people, and especially those of Muslims, committed Muslims, Muslim leaders, Muslim organizations, that are not afraid to address the issues the way that they need to be addressed. Everyday committed Muslim folk who are sincere about their deen. We have got to be the ones to intervene in this madness and make it stop. We have got to put up the wall that prevents these special interests from being able to continue to prey upon us, upon our community, upon the weakest links within our community. Now, I'm going to go from there to something international. We've been hearing a lot over the last few days about Iran and the turbulence that's taking place on the ground in certain parts of Iran. We've been hearing a lot about that over the last few days. We've been hearing a lot, reading a lot about it, hearing a lot about it in the various media, left, right, and center, broadcast media, both television and radio. I mean, just the airwaves have been heavy with what's going on in Iran. I have a piece here that a good friend sent to me by the name of Betty Mochaney. Betty is a lawyer, a practicing lawyer. She's an elder, lives in Northern Virginia. Good people. In her social media sphere with all of her friends and what have you, I mean, Betty, she engages in a lot of sometimes provocative discussion on different issues. She sent out this piece, and I'm so glad that she sent this out from an Iranian friend of hers. His name is Daniel M. Perkasali. She described him as brilliant and credible on the history and current events in Iran. And then she made a note here, don't rely on the U.S. mainstream media. Here's what he wrote about what is happening on the ground in Iran. Once again, the entire Western media coverage of the events in Iran is proven as biased and exaggerated. Common Iranians are not falling for the same divide and conquer schemes that were used in Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Here is an eyewitness account of a friend by the name of Roya Golani, currently in Iran. Quote, the facts of economic difficulties, corruption, and unemployment are undeniable. Yes, there are problems in parts of the Iranian government, just like in every other government. The facts of economic difficulties, and those economic difficulties were brought on in large part by the heavy embargo that has been on Iran for many, many, many years. In fact, for most of the years that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been in existence, since 1979, 79-80, there's been this embargo that's been in place. So again, I'm going to go ahead and read this and then just save my commentary for after the fact. Excuse me. The facts of economic difficulties, corruption, and unemployment are undeniable. But foreign media exaggerated the events happening here and have lied using false images. By accident, I was here this time and witnessed what is happening. Our house is in the center of Tehran, and every day, going out and about, I witnessed what was going on. The majority of people did not support or follow the protesters and continue not to do so. They see security as the first condition for resolving the economic hardship. The police are behaving admirably. Yesterday, in the back alleys of Tadrish, if there are any Iranians with us, me right now, and your brother has just mispronounced this, please forgive me. Looks like Tadrish. In back alleys of this area, I was waiting for a friend. It was 9 in the morning. I overheard a shopkeeper pulling up his blind, saying to his neighboring shopkeeper, and this is deep, Syria's domestic war too began like this. It seems that the quote unquote, and then he said, it seems that the political intelligence of our supposedly uneducated commoners is far superior to that of some of our supposedly educated citizens. I was filled with pride. And then it says here, read Setare. I'm not going to try to pronounce this last name. I'm going to spell it. F-A-R-M-A-N. Farmin. F-A-R. Farmin Farmayens. Farmin Farmayens book. F-A-R-M-A-N. F-A-R-M-A-E-Y-A-N. Farmin Farmayens book. To become more familiar with the role of the West and their media in Iran's contemporary history. The events she is describing has an uncanny resemblance to the current happenings in Iran. That's a very good recommendation. Now, I'm going to stop here and say I was very, again, happy to receive this alert on what's happening on the ground from an eyewitness perspective. I am automatically very cautious whenever I read anything from mainstream media or from supposedly informed sources within and among the talking heads of American think tank media when it comes to Iran. Because from the time of that revolution in 1979 up until now, there has been a demonstrated animus toward Iran. This is the only country in my lifetime that has come into existence in violation of what was once the ironclad policy of international relations. It was called the policy of bipolarity, the doctrine of bipolarity. And basically that doctrine demanded on the part of nation states throughout the world that either you had to be aligned with America and its bloc or the former Soviet Union, now Russia, and its bloc in order to survive, in order to be able to thrive. You had to be a part of either one of these two blocs. There was a non-aligned movement that probably had its strongest existence around 1949 or so. It was a non-aligned movement, but it really didn't go anywhere. Everyone fell under either one of these two blocks. And it wasn't until 1979 when the Islamic Republic of Iran came into existence with a cry, neither east nor west, only Islam. that doctrine was successfully challenged, and they have never been forgiven for this. They have never been forgiven for this. Again, the Iranian government has problems. I have expressed in the past my criticism of the way that Iran allowed itself to become mired in this unfortunate conflict in Syria that has torn this country apart. As I've said in the past, in my opinion, there are no clean hands in Syria at all. There are no clean hands. But with that said, I have a lot of respect for Iran, for the government of Iran, for the people of Iran, for having the courage to assert their independence in the name of Islam, and to fight for that independence, to struggle for that independence all the way up until this day. And so, I mean, with that being said, while I acknowledge for all of the Iranian critics out there, and especially among the Muslims who have a tendency to blindly follow wherever Uncle Sam leads, while I acknowledge that they are having their problems, I also acknowledge that I have a responsibility as a committed Muslim not to believe the hype and not to join in that negative, malicious propaganda that's aimed at undermining another predominantly Muslim country. So with that said, I am going to sign off now. And then head further down the road actually, what I'm going to do, when I check out of this hotel in a few minutes, I'm going to make a stop in Durham. I'm going to pray my Salatul Dhuhr in Durham at the masjid there, and then I'm going to go from Durham. I'm going to go to Greensboro, and I'm going to pray Asr, Salatul Asr, at the Islamic Center of Greensboro. That's where I'm going to be for Salatul Asr. From Greensboro, I'm going to head into Charlotte. I'm going to pray Salatul Maghrib at the Islamic Center of Charlotte. And then tonight for Salatul Isha, I'm going to pray at the Musalla on North Tryon Street. That's where I'm going to be throughout the day. And I'm already scheduled to speak for about 10 minutes at the Musalla. Usually when I go to the Islamic Center of Greensboro and also the Islamic Center of Charlotte, they have an open door policy for their brother Saalakhan, so there's never ever any problem of me sharing a few thoughts with my brothers there as well. The masjid in Durham, Masjid of Ibadallah, I believe the name of it is, that is 50-50. I'm going to go there though for Salatul Dhuhr. And then again, Greensboro for Asr, Islamic Center of Charlotte for Maghrib, and then the Musalla in Charlotte on for Salatul Isha. So if there's anyone that would like to connect with their brother Saalakhan, perhaps through me, make a donation to the Aafia Foundation and our work, the work that we're doing, or just have some conversation about the issues that are pressing for us and for this country of ours, this potentially great but deeply disturbed nation called America. Then inshallah ta'ala, I look forward to seeing you at any of these locations now. And with that said, I thank those of you who joined your brother Saalakhan for this brief presentation. I'm going to sign off and check out. Assalamu alaikum.